This is David Rovics with a song for today. One songwriter's take on the history of the world, one song at a time, available wherever you get your podcasts. Using a form of brutality and debt peonage closely resembling slavery, British colonists and their collaborators ran their empire in India. Their biggest source of revenue after land taxes was the opium trade. China produced a lot of things British people wanted, such as tea and porcelain. But China didn't have much need for inferior British textiles, addictive drugs, or anything else Britain had to offer. So the wise men in power in London decided if China didn't want their opium, they'd make them want their opium. They disregarded explicit Chinese law and exported huge amounts of opium to China anyway. On June 3rd, 1839, Chinese troops burned 20,000 crates of opium that was grown in India under British overseers. This act of defiance, naturally, led to Britain and its allies such as France, Russia, and the United States teaming up to declare war on China. There were 2 opium wars, with several decades in between them. Each went on for years and involved thousands of Chinese dead, with cities destroyed. Each time, the issue was that the Chinese emperor not be allowed to ban the importation of this highly addictive drug that was so damaging the fabric of Chinese society. What we now know of as the Opium Wars are rarely mentioned in the West and considered at least mildly embarrassing, even for the worst apologists for colonialism. But at the time, they were not called the Opium Wars. They were called trade wars. They were all about national sovereignty, and what the colonial powers referred to as free trade was enforced by big armies with lots of cannons.
Let me tell you a tale, stir a hornet's nest, well remembered in the East, most forgotten in the West. It was the 1830s, and the Industrial Revolution was turning Europe into a land of wage slaves and air pollution. The history books tell us it was the era of free trade, and the entire world hungered for the products Europe made. Merchants plied their wares across the 7 seas, and they brought back things like porcelain, silk, and tea. Soon all the tea in China could barely keep the West awake. Such a thirst for Chinese products as could barely be slaked. They liked to drink their tea in cups of Chinese porcelain, and those who could afford it loved the silk upon their skin. But what made the merchants and the monarchs scream and cry and shout? They seemed to have little to offer that China could live without. They didn't want their muskets and they didn't want their wool, which left the British coffers empty and the Chinese coffers full. And they called it a trade war. They called it a trade war, and I guess that could be so. They say it's not free trade if it's just a one-way flow, because apparently free trade is when the West comes out ahead. That's how it is in practice, though that's never what is said. The fact of history they'd have a sweep under the rug. The one thing they could sell in China was an addictive drug. It had long been banned by Chinese law, but the British didn't care. They packed the opium up in crates and they shipped it there. And they called it a trade war. It all came to a head in 1838. When the soldiers of the emperor torched 20,000 crates. It took 3 days to burn it, and when the fires had gone out, the Chinese people would soon learn what free trade was all about. Navies came from Britain, France, and the USA. In blood, land, and silver they would make the Chinese pay. Cities leveled, thousands killed. The war was 3 years long. That's how they opened China. That's how they got Hong Kong. And they called it a trade war. And they called it a trade war. And they called it a trade war.
This has been a song for today from David Rovics, making popular education popular again. If you go to davidrovics.com, you can hear lots of other episodes of this and other podcasts, see where I'm touring next, and get on my email list. You can also click on CSA there on my website and join my community-supported art program, which is mainly how I get by in the free streaming era. I hope to see you sometime soon again here on the internet or on the road and hopefully in the streets.